about to play Great Ace Attorney 2. This is Vitafuser. In our last episode, we called Dr. Steve to the stand, and our quote-unquote friend, Mr. Drebber, is trying to conceal the fact he actually saw the professor. Time to see exactly what we can see. There it is. Oh, Asman. What these two pieces of evidence have in common is a signature. A signature! The signature on the illustration that accompanies the 10-year-old article and the signature on the contract belong to the same person. What? Ah! As the court has heard, this illustration was drawn 10 years ago by the newspaper reporter who found Mr. Drebber and interviewed him about the ordeal. If you look closely, the reporter's signature can be seen in the bottom right corner of the drawing. If you look at the contract here, which was signed between the witness and the victim last year, you can clearly see Mr. Asman's signature at the bottom. Let me see now. Good lord, yes, they're identical. In short, the journalist who drew these illustrations and wrote the article published about Mr. Drebber 10 years ago was the victim of this case, Mr. Odie Asman. Reboot. But explain to the court why. Why would that constitute a motive for the witness to murder Asman? Well, if you think back, you remember that Mr. Drebber talked about that article in his testimony. Grave robbing, you say? Yes, exhuming fresh corpses to sell is reasonably lucrative. That is quite beyond the pale. You would invite divine retribution, sir. Yes, well, I think I suffered retribution enough. The Daily Circus eventually unearthed my name and put it in print. It caused me a great many headaches. In the end, I had to leave the university. That was the only paper with the bad grace to identify me, unambiguously, I might add. Then I gave up on my dream of becoming a scientist, and it was all because of that newspaper article. At the time, you were a student of the University of London who dreamt of becoming a scientist. However, this single newspaper article changed your entire life. So Mr. Asman used to be a newspaper journalist, did he? He did, my lord. In fact, it's a widely held belief that Asman managed to position himself at the heart of his criminal network, thanks to the many dubious connections he made during his time as reporter. So, you had to give up on your dream and leave university. You lost everything. Eventually, you found yourself working in the field of science, but only in the shadows. And all because of that article, written by Mr. Asman. Enough! Stop this endless drivel about my life. Explain yourself, Mr. Drebber. Yes, it's true. I had to leave the university as a result of that article. But it was just the straw that broke the camel's back. What do you mean? Almost every student of science in the faculty was too poor to actually conduct any research. But they struggled on with their hypotheses anyway. We all did, only to have them taken by vultures. Sooner or later, you knew your ideas would be stolen and patented by some wretch or other, after all. Good gracious. Making a name for yourself as a scientist in a climate like that was a miracle only a select few geniuses could ever hope to achieve. Personally, I wasn't one of those geniuses, so it was hardly a wrench. I think not. Being forced out of the university because of Logate was the best thing that could have happened to me. Mr. Drebber, do you genuinely believe that? Of course I do. Who better placed to know whether or not I possess a talent for science than me? I'm sorry to say that your words don't ring true at all. How dare you? And I have evidence to prove it. How are you in a position to say anything about me? I don't know you from Adam. Fine, if you think you have evidence, go ahead. Show it. What could you possibly have to disprove the idea that I was happy to leave university because I lacked talent? There you go. Do you remember this, Mr. Drebber? We found it at your workshop. Is that a Royal Society trophy for excellence in science? What exactly is this trophy, Counsel? It's the greatest honor that can be bestowed on a young scientist, my lord. There is no higher accolade. It recognizes emerging talent and promises a bright future. Good gracious! Your prospects for the future were excellent, weren't they, Mr. Drebber? Because even then, you were a genius in your field. But you lost everything. You had no more future. Your talents would go to waste. All as a result of this one newspaper article. I don't know when you realized who Mr. Asman was, but when it dawned on you that he was the same journalist who 10 years ago ruined your life, it's abundantly clear. You had no intention of forgiving the man. The truth is, finally, he's gonna fold. Ha! Fine. Clearly this has run its course now. What? I admit it. All of it. What? That was abrupt. What are you doing? It's exactly as the Japanese man said. I was coerced into going along with this man's plot to murder the victim, on the condition he kept my dirty secret from 10 years ago. No. Good Lord! Dr. Seath! Do you realize what you're saying, woman? It's all true. That day, when I arrived at the Crystal Tower and saw the birdcage, my heart nearly stopped beating. The memory from a decade ago that I had done my best to bury deep inside myself. It was the professor again, staring me in the face. And then, before I had a chance to react, I noticed something else. There was a note tucked inside the model's jacket. Dr. Seath, you will go along with my plan. From someone who knows the truth about what really happened that night 10 years ago. All the instructions were there in the note. Every detail was meticulously written out. I had no choice but to do what it said. I made the necessary alterations to the scene and fabricated the autopsy report as instructed. There was really no other choice. It had to be done to protect the judiciary. I can only apologize now. That's a little too early. I don't believe it. Why on earth would you buckle now? Well, there's no point trying to hide it anymore, is there? I would have done anything to stop it coming out, even collaborate in a murder. But the great lie about that execution 10 years ago has been exposed. Whatever happens, I'm finished. So then, Mr. Drebber, what do you say to that? Your accomplice has admitted everything. Surely it goes without saying. You admit your part in it too, then? I admit nothing. At all. What? Have you forgotten that the kinesis machine was ripped to shreds by an explosion? Short of me admitting to a crime, there's really no possible way for you to prove I did anything wrong. No! Order! 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 Whatever this man says, I admit everything. He threatened to expose my secret, so I went along with his plan. And Lord Van Zieks, yes, I hope you'll accept my apologies. What happens next is in your hands, of course. Oh, we're not done here. I've heard more than enough now. I hereby present the final findings of this court. This trial is not the proper forum in which to pursue the alleged wrongdoings of Mr. Drebber. The defendant is Professor Albert Harebrain. Very true. It had slipped my mind. Isn't he one of your closest friends? As the court has heard, Dr. Seethe has admitted to the allegations brought by the defense, thereby absolving the defendant of any possible guilt. You mean, at the present time it is the conclusion of this court, the defendant was not involved in any wrongdoing. Does the prosecution have any objection? None, my lord. Congratulations, Mr. Naruhodo. You've proven Mr. Harebrain's innocence. We're not done here, though. That was too easy. Unless the prosecution or defense have any other matters to discuss. I don't know. This doesn't feel quite right. Why did Dr. Seethe suddenly admit to it like that? Is everything alright? It's just like Mr. Sholmes said. The way the trial is set to end now, the judge will certainly deliver a verdict of not guilty. But is that really what we want? What the defense should be pushing for now is further testimony.
Objection.
The defense objects to the trial ending at this time, my lord. I beg your pardon? We demand one final testimony. What? You do realize I'm about to educate in favor of your client, I presume. What are you playing at now, my Nipponese friend? Why would you want to obstruct the conclusion of the trial at this point? No defense lawyer in his right mind would do that. You're right. I'm not. Mr. Naruhodo, what exactly are you thinking? The truth. The whole truth. And a way to bring it all in the opening. Right. Yes, in hindsight. One word of warning before I go. If in the course of the trial this afternoon you perceive even a shadow of doubt about the truth, don't let it out of your sight. Pursue it like a dog with a bone. To the bitter end, you understand. Do not falter, whatever may come to pass. I'm sure Mr. Sholmes knew. He must have deduced this would happen. Yes, I'm here in court to advocate for my client, and to secure an acquittal. Obviously. But that's not all. I believe that I have a duty to the court to pursue the whole truth of the case, until every last detail is laid bare. And that is why the defense calls for further testimony from Dr. Seethe. Testimony from me? About what? About the nature of your collaboration with Mr. Enoch Drebber. Ha! In any case, it's escaped your attention. I've already admitted to everything I did. The whole truth has already been revealed. So stop wasting everyone's time. As his lordship made very plain, your client will get the acquittal you wanted for him. There's simply no point protecting his business further with another tedious cross-examination.
Objection!
Pray forgive my careless handling of that hallowed bottle. I slipped. Ay, ay, ay. That's what you call it. What is your objection, Lord Van Zieks? The prosecution also calls for supplementary testimony from the witness. Don't be stupid! If there is more to this case than has yet come to light, then I will join my learned friend in pursuing the facts until the bitter end. You what? Lord Van Zieks. This is most irregular, to say the least. However, as the prosecution also calls for it, I will uphold the request. Dr. Seath, you will testify for the court, explaining the full extent of your involvement in the murder apparently committed by Mr. Drebber. Very well. It all began at the scene when I saw the waxwork and the note tucked inside its jacket. The actual body of the victim, as indicated in the note's instructions, was beneath the experimentation stage. The body had to be arranged in certain ways to implicate the defendant, which was my job. I enlisted the help of the entire forensic investigation team to dress the scene properly. The truth about the execution 10 years ago is a state secret of the highest level. I had to protect it. So, I was right. The stage and the machine were all specially designed for the deception. So it seems, and all meticulously prepared, you did well to see through it. You're a very shrewd boy. So kind of you to say. And what about this autopsy report, then? All I did was record the location of the body as being in the Crystal Tower instead of under the stage. That's all. That's a terrible corruption. Only my team were aware of the deceit, and then only under my explicit instructions. Nobody else at Scotland Yard knew anything about it, I assure you. We must be thankful for small mercies, I suppose. Well, I believe that testimony has cleared everything. There's no particular need for a cross-examination, I would say. I wouldn't say that. Just look at that expression on Dr. Seath's face. It's the defense's right to cross-examine any witness following testimony. What is it about you Japanese that makes you all so doggedly persistent? Very well, if you so desire, counsel, proceed with the cross-examination. Yes, my lord. The body had to be arranged in certain ways to implicate the defendant, which was my job. When you say arranged, I presume you mean with this. Yes, the instructions in the engineer's note said something along the lines of, fabricate some evidence to make it clear that Harebrain alone could have killed Asmund. So you mean that was your doing? I fetched Harebrain's ridiculous screwdriver from the stage, and took it with me, alone, to the abyss under the stage where the birdcage had fallen. Alone, Doctor? I didn't feel it would be appropriate to involve anybody else in that particular part of the deception. There was a void under the stage where I found the birdcage lying in the dirt. I approached it, leaned down, and slowly opened it up. Then, I took the screwdriver in both hands and plunged it into the man's chest. And then you noted in your fake autopsy report as a fictitious cause of death. Exactly. So the actual cause of death was the trauma resulting from 30-foot drop. My word. What is it, Miss Susato? Something about Dr. C's last statement is playing on my mind. That's all. Mine too. Dr. C. There's really no need to shout. I can hear you perfectly well. The defense calls for you to add what you just said to your formal testimony. Oh? Which part? What she did to the victim. How you stabbed Mr. Asman in the chest. That part. Fine. If that's what you want. But there's really no need to point. The prosecution concurs. You're pointing too. I stood over the victim's corpse while laying there. Alrighty, so this should be...
Objection.
I've got a nasty feeling that this inconsistency points to an extremely uncomfortable truth. What on earth is the matter, counsel? Have you lost your tongue? I apologize, my lord. Dr. Seeth, in that last statement of yours, there's just one point that seems to defy explanation. Out with it, my learned friend. Ooh, almost did Drebber's voice for him. There's an obvious inconsistency between your description and this photograph, which shows the victim in the birdcage following the events that led to his death.
Objection.
The court has already examined that photograph in depth. There's nothing new we can learn from it.
Objection.
Yes, we've already considered it. That's true. But we now know the facts to be different. What do you mean? I believe we should let the defense explain. Where in this photograph would we see the alleged inconsistency? It's the blood stain.
Take that.
Look closely at the blood stain on the victim's chest. It clearly extends in a downward direction towards the man's feet. And why is that significant, counsel? If the victim was stabbed moments before the kinesis machine was set in motion, that's entirely expected. Ah, of course. No, that's not what happened. Exactly, my lord. Dr. Seeth made it very clear in her testimony just now that the point at which she stole Professor Hairbrain's screwdriver and stabbed the victim was after the grand deception was set in motion, when the birdcage had fallen below the stage out of sight. From the shape of it, it's clear the birdcage would have fallen on its side after the 30-foot drop. And if the victim had really been stabbed whilst in the birdcage in that position, the blood from the wound would have spread out equally in all directions. For it to have formed the longitudinal appearance we see in the picture is inconceivable. Given that the victim's blood seeped vertically downwards from the wound, it must be the case that when you stabbed Mr. Asman, he was standing up. In short, Dr. Seeth, your latest testimony was a total fabrication. I knew it. I was right. Now I've identified that contradiction. There's only one way to explain the facts. We've all been under a great misapprehension here. What? What sort of misapprehension? Dr. Seeth, you claim you were coerced into helping Mr. Drebber as a result of the note he left in the waxwork. You claim you made changes to the scene of the crime to implicate the defendant. And you claim you authored a fake autopsy report to cover your tracks. But one of those claims is an out-and-out lie. Because the question of what the bloodstain really tells us has only one possible answer. And if that is the case, what is it, man? Counsel, you've clearly struck upon a revelation. Now tell the court what it is. What part of Dr. C's story is shown to be a lie? The stabbing of the victim. The answer is very simple, if you consider the sequence of events. If when the victim was stabbed, the blood from the wound seeped downwards as it did, we can be sure the victim must have been either sitting or standing upright at the time. But as you rightfully pointed out, the birdcage would have fallen on its side when it fell beneath the stage. Yes, it would, which tells us that the victim must have been in that position of his own accord.
Objection!
That's impossible. The man was dead, remember? No, that's the misapprehension. When the birdcage fell from the stage in the void below, it must have hit the ground with considerable force. He was starting to get up, but Mr. Asman didn't die in the fall. He probably lost consciousness for a while, but when he came around, he got to his feet to climb out of the cage. Just as Dr. Seath appeared. If the victim was in fact alive at that point in time, it changes everything. Mr. Odie Asman's killer wasn't the defendant, Professor Albert Hairbrain, nor was it the mastermind behind the stage trickery, Mr. Enoch Drever. It was you, Dr. Courtney Seath. Order! Can this possibly be true? Have you been taking me for a fool? It was you, was it? You killed him. You hoped by admitting to becoming an apprentice accomplice in Mr. Drever's scheme, the trial would end, before you were accused of a far worse crime. Cold-blooded murder. Oh, this is like that one case from Apollo Justice. The smuggling case. Do shut up. You're so desperate now, you're making all this up. As if I would do something like that.
Objection!
I assure you, the defense is not desperate, Doctor. Mr. Naruhodo has established the facts using evidence and logic alone. Ha! Logic! Don't make me laugh. Sadly, your logic has a gaping hole in it. What? What do you mean? I'd have thought it was obvious. A motive, boy. You're lacking a motive. What possible reason would I have to kill Mr. Asman? Asman was involved in any number of criminal activities, from coercion to theft to murder. But there's no known connection to Dr. Seath there. I'm rather relieved to say it does seem somewhat far-fetched. True, there's no obvious motive, but there's still something in the back of my mind. I sure have seen something somewhere that hints at what the coroner might have done this. That one time we were there. I might have tampered with the crime scene and concocted a fake report. But murdering someone for no reason is a very different story.
Objection!
Now, when you question what possible reason you could have for wanting to kill Mr. Asman, something did come to mind. What? What was it, counsel? Enlighten the court at once. Yes, we saw it yesterday, didn't we? Something that seemed strange, but we had no reason to suspect it at the time. There's a particular object that explains why Dr. Seed would have wanted to kill Mr. Asman. It's a scalpel. Or rather, scalpels. Did you say scalpels? It would appear that word has struck a chord, Doctor. Doctor? Doctor. Doctor. You! Come on, out with it! It was yesterday, when we visited your laboratory. Look at this big book here. It appears to be an accounting ledger. It's a record of the forensics investigation team's spending, I think. Oh? What is it? It's clear that the team purchases various equipment and supplies on a monthly basis, but, well, one entry seems rather strange. In what way? They're buying 500 scalpels every month. Ooh, we got her now. 500 scalpels a month? At first, I wondered what on earth you could be using that many scalpels for. But actually, I realize now it's not the scalpels themselves that are significant. It's the money for them, disappearing every month from the department's accounts. Asman's criminal organization relied heavily on extortion for its funding. Tracing the money from the forensic investigation team's account to find where it was going would be extremely straightforward. 10 years ago, when Mr. Asman was still a journalist and wrote this article about Mr. Drever, he may well have stumbled upon information as he was researching the story. Information relating to Dr. C's darkest secret that he would use to rack money from her for the next decade. A darkest secret? Good lord, you mean... I don't know what happened on the night of that execution 10 years ago, but clearly the opportunity to rid yourself of that menace was too tempting to pass up. So in the end, you weren't coerced at all, were you? You did it entirely of your own free will. You stabbed Mr. Asman in the heart with all your might. To silence the blackmailer who knew your dark secret forever. You'll never understand. None of you. That was a very subdued breakdown. What we've had to keep covered up all these long years. Very, very subdued. About as subdued as, the producer from the first game. As very little of the machine remains after it was ripped apart by the bomb. The truth of this case can never be properly established unless you speak out. And if you decide not to, it's very possible that Courtney Seed will escape punishment for her crimes. Please, sir, own up to what you've done, and tell the truth about what happened. 10 years ago, you told the truth, and you were robbed of a bright and successful future as a result. I can certainly understand your bitterness, and your consternation now. However, this is surely the chance you've been waiting for, to sever the hold that fate's had over you all these years. Super high voltage instantaneous kinesis? I mean, really? It's the addle-brained mock scientists that are the worst, you know. They don't recognize the fact that they don't have talent. They can't even get that right. And so they end up chasing impossible dreams, having unbridled faith in their abilities. They go on and on about their wonderful hypotheses, their stupid eyes shining like a little child's. They make me sick. I can't abide their foolishness. Careful, Mr. Drever. I was particularly pleased with the kinesis machine. It made for quite a show, didn't it? So you admit it. You admit that it was nothing more than a sham made for the purpose of killing the victim. Yes, I admit it. I did it all in the name of revenge. Revenge for the future that Mr. Asmund's article had deprived you of 10 years earlier. But the revenge you sought didn't stop at Asmund, did it? Which is where that very particular waxwork comes in. Yes, I see. That condemned convict that you saw rising from the grave in Lowgate Cemetery 10 years ago, if your account of those events was all true, then obviously Scotland Yard couldn't afford to acknowledge what happened. Even if it meant discrediting a bright young man and crushing any future career he might have had. So your plan required that you abduct that particular waxwork model, in order to exact your revenge on Scotland Yard as well. Or on Dr. Seath, to be precise. It was a year ago. By some extraordinary twist of fate, Asmund turned up at my workshop. He didn't remember who I was, of course. He just wanted to employ my services as an engineer. And he happened to have a paper with him. An article on the front page caught my eye. About the coroner who had handled that bogus autopsy being appointed to a head of a new forensic team. When I learned that news, my cognitive processes started to devise the plan. What a horrid tale. He robbed me of my future, so I wanted to use the man's own wiles against him, for revenge. And have that rotten Scotland Yard eating out of my hand at the same time. I wanted them all to suffer the same humiliation I'd had to suffer. Your actions against those who'd ruined your future were justified as revenge, at least to yourself. Certainly, no one has the right to destroy another one's prospects, especially for purely selfish gain. And yet, in carrying out your plan, you did exactly that to someone else, didn't you? Yeah, you did. You did that to Harebrain. Did I? Professor Harebrain's only crime was passion for his hypotheses. But you had no compunction about sacrificing his future to effect your revenge. You knew that he would be forever branded a failure and a fraud. Perhaps life treated you unfairly 10 years ago, and other misconduct left your life in tatters. But remember this. Your own actions resulted in exactly the same thing for another perfectly innocent young man. You got nothing for that, do you? Lord Van Zieks, what of Dr. Seath? An immediate warrant for her arrest has been granted, and she's been remanded in custody, my lord. I presume she will face trial in the coming days, along with Mr. Drebber. A most regrettable situation indeed. She's made great contributions to her profession over the years. It really is a hard truth to swallow. However, that is a topic for some future occasion. For now, Professor Harebrain... yes? It seems there's a great deal more to your experiment than you realize. However, I think we can assume now that all the sordid details have been brought to light. This has been a long and profound trial. But I'm pleased to say you are absolved of all guilt. The whole experience has taught me a very great but painful lesson. This dedicated scientist, this devotee of natural philosophy. I've been selfish and self-centered, and above all, a fool. Professor, I spent my life thinking of nothing but my research, misguidedly believing I could do whatever I set my mind to despite my lack of talent. And the worst of it is, in the process, I've caused others pain and misery. Others who are far, far greater people than I. No, Professor, that's not true. What? Don't tar yourself with the same brush as Trevor. What happened was his doing, and his alone. This outcome is his fate, not yours. You're not to blame in any way. Lord Van Zieks, and the derision with which he referred to you earlier, calling you a fool, talentless even. The man has no idea. To believe in yourself and work your fingers to the bone to realize your dreams. That's laudable, not laughable. No one has the right to deride another for such choices. Oh. Thank you, Barak. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Yes, my lord. It is this court's expectation you find the defendant not guilty of the charge of which he stands accused. I presume there are no objections? None from me, my lord. Certainly not. This trial has really made me think, but this is the right decision. It's all been proven methodically and rigorously. I have no misgivings whatsoever. Well, sir, he's done, is he? He's all over. I don't know what's become of the yard these days. I don't recognize the place. Very well. In that case, I hereby pronounce the defendant not guilty. Court is adjourned. It's over. That was some trial. Professor, what a splendid outcome, isn't it? Oh, it is it? Oh, it is. Congratulations, Professor Harebrain. With Mr. Naruhodo, Mr. Zato, I am truly beside myself with gratitude. How can I ever thank you enough? I'm just glad it's all been cleared up. Then you realize you were just caught up in a bad situation. Right now, you know, if I had that research grant money, I'd give the whole lot to you. Every penny. Well, that's very kind, but I'm just a student, so we don't need any financial reward. Your acquittal is more than enough. Oh dear. Oh, what can I do? Aha! How about this? A memento. A paper by my hypothesis is inside. Well, just as a memento, then. Thank you. I've been wondering, Professor, what are you going to do now? Oh my, yes. What am I going to do? You're going to stop chewing your fingernails, that's for sure. That's a dirty habit. I know, I used to do it. My hypothesis and my great machine lie in ruins. But still, it's been too long since I was last in London, so perhaps I'll enjoy some sightseeing. I must explore the great exhibition while I'm here too. See if new inspiration hits me. That's a wonderful idea. I can't allow that. Lord Van Zieks, what are you doing in here? Barak! I'm sorry you had to go through that, Albert. Well, if I'm honest, it was terrifying. You were like a great demon behind your bench there, snarling down on your prey. You're one of the few true friends I have. I couldn't leave it to anybody else to handle the prosecution. Or the defense. Sorry, or the defense. Did I just hear that right? I always knew you had my best interests at heart. Don't worry. How about you show me around while I'm here in town? It's been a long time since we left university. We have a lot to catch up on. Listen, Albert. In a few days, your acquittal will be made official. When that happens, you must head straight to Dover. I'll accompany you. What? From there, you'll cross the channel and make your way back to Germany. I've already purchased the tickets. But no! Hold on a minute, Barack. What about the Great Exhibition? This is a chance of a lifetime for me. I want to look around. No sightseeing, Albert. Give up on the idea. Sometimes it's hard to see any warmth in those eyes, Barack. Lord Van Zieks, what's all this about? Unnecessary precaution. Yes, I think I understand. Well, Iris told me that when you meet Lord Van Zieks at his office some days ago, he asked how Mr. Natsume was doing. That's right. I remember being surprised at the time, and thinking it was nice of him to ask. The point is, Mr. Natsume is still alive and well. Even though it's been more than 6 months now since he stood trial with the Reaper as the prosecutor. You mean the Reaper's influence doesn't stretch overseas? Those in the Reaper's sights meet their ends days or sometimes months after their acquittal. That's been the pattern up to now. But of course, we know that both Mr. Natsume and Gina were completely innocent. True. And perhaps that governs the Reaper's actions. The truly innocent are spared. But I don't want to take any chances with a close personal friend. Barack! Like the mustached Nipponese, this man should leave the country without delay. That's why I'm packing him off to Germany at once. Right. Does your friend-shaped package get any say in it? Goodness! Was this your intention all along then, Lord Van Zieks? In court, where people think of him as the Reaper, this man seems absolutely merciless, and yet, sometimes I feel as though I don't understand him at all. It's time to go, Albert. Back to the prison for the time being. Yes, alright. Well then, Mr. Naruhodo. Thank you so much for everything. Not at all, Professor. It was a pleasure getting to know you. Best wishes, Professor Hairbrain. Well, once the dust is settled, you must come up and visit me in Germany. Jawohl! Anyway, goodbye for now. Now, my Nipponese friend. Yes? I thought you'd gone too. We've matters to discuss. Can you spare me some time? You want to go talk with me? I'll be waiting in the courtroom in 10 minutes. Well, that was strange. For some reason, I didn't get that sense of impending doom as he walked away this time. The enigma, Barack Van Zieks. What does he want to discuss, I wonder? The answer awaits in the courtroom, I suppose. Here goes, then. The Old Bailey courtroom. Oh, are we gonna see his face, actually? So, are you satisfied? You saved a guileless scientist from a great injustice. Yes, I think so. I'm relieved, at least, that the man's innocence could be proven. Anyway, I imagine you've been wondering where my animosity towards you Nipponese comes from. I thought you just didn't like me. I imagine you saw me as a pretentious child from an unimportant land who had no business being here. But now, I think differently. You clearly know our ways. So I would guess that some specific incident led to your thorough dislike of my race. Will you tell me what happened, please? The Professor. I thought I'd never hear that name in this courtroom again, to be honest. He took your brother's life. Clint. My brother was Clint Van Zieks. 16 years ago, when I was still just in my teens. He was already the director of prosecutions and a key member of the judiciary. I looked up to him. He was my everything I aspired to be. He was involved in the establishment of justice systems in foreign countries as well. There were exchange programs between Britain and other nations too then, to share knowledge and ideas. As part of one of those programs, 3 judicial students came to Britain from your homeland, the Empire of Japan. Oh, if it was 16 years ago and then, one of them could have been my father. Of course. I remember Dr. Mikotoba well. I had no idea. I was a minor at the time, training at the prosecutor's office. One day, Clint introduced me to 3 visiting Nipponese. So you've actually met my father. He and his colleagues were polite and amicable. They were adept at their work, and exacting in their standards. It was my first encounter with the Nipponese spirit, and it made a very great impression upon me. But 6 years later, that's when it happened. The investigation was going nowhere. There were no suspects even, just an ever-growing list of victims. And in the end, my brother became one of them. The last, in fact, before the case was finally resolved. I'm so sorry, Lord Van Zieks. Truly. Clint was always ready to put his life on the line for justice anyway. So he wouldn't have wanted it any other way. He lost his life to the killer, but it was his victory in the end. For me personally, though, it was a great loss. I found myself in a very dark place indeed. When I finally found out the killer's identity, the reason why no one had been able to catch the man sooner ceased to be such a mystery. He'd been hiding in plain sight all the time. In plain sight? Are you aware of political events 10 years ago? It was a period of extremely sensitive diplomacy between the British and Japanese empires. A new treaty was being forged, I think. Correct. The Anglo-Japanese Treaty of Friendship and Navigation was being concluded. The leaders of both countries were deep in extensive political discussions. Which is why this particular killer's appearance in court was conducted at a closed trial. If the British public had known the identity of the killer, not only would the treaty have been in jeopardy, our 2 nations could very well have ended up at war. What? A war? Between Britain and Japan? But that would mean... Oh my! You mean to say the professor was... Japanese.
When the trial reached its conclusion earlier, I thought to myself, yes, it's time. Time for you to come face to face with this hideous monster. I borrowed the key for the mask from the proprietress of the Waxwork Museum. So see for yourselves now. Confirm it with your own eyes. The truth that's been hidden this past decade.
That's the professor?
Yes, it's him.
Until now, the thought never even crossed my mind. That the mass murderer, whose crimes shook Britain as never before,
Was Japanese.
was Japanese.
Wait a minute. That face. I feel as though I've seen it somewhere. It's strangely familiar.
He's not reacting well. It's him.
Father. What? Father? Kazuma! My best friend, Kazuma Asogi. After a whole year, finally his memories return. As he stood there before me, Ryunosuke. Hello again. My friend.
Kazuma-sama!
Judicial Assistant Mikotoba. It's been a very long road. Thank you. Thank you for guiding my friend here when I could not.
It was an honor.
I knew you wouldn't die that easily. Kazuma.
I owe you thanks, too, for taking good care of that in my absence.
Oh. Karuma. Great blade of the Asogi clan. Passed down through the generations. When we left Japan, this sword was at my friend's side. A Japanese man's katana is his soul. He couldn't be parted from it. But then, when the incident happened, it was Susato-san's wish that I inherit the sword.
And my voice acting is not that off.
Along with my memories of the friendship we shared. With this by my side, I always felt that you were watching over me somehow.
I've made it. At last. Father.
Are you saying... Surely not. You mean... You knew all this time? I'm looking at it. But... I still can't believe it. This mass murderer is Kazuma's father.
Kazuma-sama.
Ryunosuke, we have much to talk about. But now is not the time. I'll be seeing you.
That's all Kazuma said. Before he turned and left us there, in the courtroom.
So he's the living after image of the man who took my brother's life, is he? Yes, Kazuma Asogi, my best friend. 3 months ago, when Lord Strongheart introduced us, I had an inkling there was something there. Some connection. But why did Lord Strongheart do that? Why did he make Kazuma Lord Van Zeek's apprentice, and when he was suffering amnesia too? The man was apprehended, even executed. But his legacy just won't die. That's the sad truth. Anyway, that's all I had to say. I thank you for meeting with me as I asked. "10 years ago, my grandmother took me to the railway station. We were there to meet my father from the train. For me, it was the first time I'd ever seen him. Poor Susato-san. All this is tied up with painful memories for her too. She never talked about this with me before though. It took time to adjust to having father around, but just when I was starting to get used to it, he called me into his study one day. He told me that a great friend of his had passed away in London, and that the friend had left behind a son, a boy, 7 years my senior. Father told me the boy had made a promise to his late father, so he was studying to become a defense lawyer. I wanted to help, so I studied to become a qualified judicial assistant. As I'm sure you've worked out, that young man's name was Kazuma Asogi. So you see, that's how he and I met.
For a brief moment, my great friend had returned, only to disappear again all too soon. But in that fleeting encounter, something stirred. Something that had been dormant for a long time, as if great wheels had been set in motion. I could almost hear them creaking into life. In some ways, it was the end of a chapter, but in many, it was the start of a new one.
Oh boy. We're really going now. Yep, I'll see you guys next time.
Have no doubt, I'm in control. You may think chasing ghosts is